Well, at what point do we officially give up here? This championship season has started like no other. There are record lows being set in terms of my scores, your scores, and everyone else's predictions too. As today, we return to look ahead to match week 14, a full midweek fixture list in the EFL Championship. As always, we're going to go through and preview all 12 matches. We'll encourage you to do exactly the same down in the comments below. Give us your score predictions. If you beat or match my overall score, you'll get a shout out when we return on Thursday for the last set of games before the international break in November. Will there be a few manager changes over that period? There's certainly some questions to be asked. But before we go and look ahead to everything that's coming up this week, let's have a look back at, well, just about the craziest week of the season so far, because match week 13 saw me get a joint record low score in 5.5 years of doing this. 2 points over the 12 matches, those for Birmingham's win and for Oxford and Millwall's draw. However, it was just a day of crazy scorelines. Not many perfect scores about because there were 3s, 4s and 5s floating about everywhere. There were bucket loads of away wins, there were loads of favourites losing, and as a result, if we go and have a look at the comments section, nobody again for the second time this season scored more than 8 points, a joint new record for the podcast predictions, and the average score again was very low. So let's give a shout out to all of those who beat and matched my score, which is most of you of course, but not by much, because level with me on 2 were Sven and Dave. Last week's winner, Sven, joining me near the bottom of the table. On 3, it was Mick, Etienne, Teo, Mello and Swifty. On 4, Mitchell, Keno and Steve. On 5, Peter, Brian and Isaac. On 6, Nigel, Bobby and Gordon. On 7, Poppy, Ojo and Marco. And then the 2 joint winners at the top with 8 points in a very difficult weekend were Chris and Nathan, 2 regular players. Well done to both of you. You are the joint match week winners for number 13 this season. Unlucky for most of us, but will it go right in match week 14 this midweek? Let's look ahead to the 12 matches and start with the 8 taking place on Tuesday night. First of which is Birmingham City versus Millwall. Birmingham finally had that game we talked about, one where they created chances, took chances and scored goals. Now again, they probably weren't coming from the expected sources, but they were just brilliant. They were fantastic. Portsmouth had an off day. We'll get to them later. But Birmingham took advantage. And after going 1-0 up at half-time, they came out in the second half, kept pressing, kept pushing. And those sort of low-scoring games we've seen a lot of this year, very much a distant memory after that one. Now they come up against the Millwall side, who ended their run of 4 successive wins with a 2-2 draw away at Oxford, and it'll be a very frustrating one, having conceded that equaliser in the 96th minute. But in the grand scheme of things, not a terrible result or a terrible season so far. Of course, Gary Rowett getting a sucker punch against his former club. Millwall had the best chances of the game. It was one of those where, again, they weren't able to play on the counter. They weren't able to give up possession because Oxford wanted to do the exact same thing. And it led to quite an interesting game, actually. But Millwall have generally been on a really good run. 3 clean sheets in the last 5. Birmingham hadn't scored many prior to this one, but they are susceptible at home. We saw them concede 3 against Hull, 2 against Sheffield Wednesday. And I just wonder how this is going to pan out. I actually think Birmingham will have more of the ball. Millwall will be able to play their traditional away style. And I'm going to have to sit on the fence to start with. There weren't many last weekend, but I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline of 1-1. On to the second game, and 2 sides that had, well, surprisingly shocking results in both directions last weekend. It is Bristol City versus Blackburn Rovers. Let's start with the positives, which are Blackburn back-to-back wins, having beat Leicester by 2-0 away from home. Good Johnson with the brace in a really good performance. And look, we've mentioned that Leicester are toothless a lot this season, and that proved the case again. On another day, Blackburn could have conceded a couple from the chances they gave up. But on the counter, they looked a threat. They did really well. And to be fair, they're starting to improve a bit. Just as Ishmael was coming under pressure, they've got themselves out of that relegation mix and can now start to look up the table. But generally, away from home, they have struggled. And they're going away to a Bristol City side that are still in 5th place, despite a 5-1 defeat away at Stoke City. Now, I think it's fair to say nobody saw this coming. Bristol City had a very solid defensive record so far this year. They've been largely excellent away from home and exciting to watch under Struber. Weirdly, if you go and look at the match stats, it was a pretty even game. Bristol City had a lot of chances, But to be fair, Stoke had the better ones, and it was a bit of the old school Bristol City where they tried to outscore the opposition and defensively looked like conceding every time they defended. I think the biggest mistake I've made is truly believing that they would ever be consistent again now. After 3 wins in a row, 2 clean sheets, a 5-1 defeat away from home makes this really hard to call. But despite that, I have to look at the fact that Bristol City had won their last 2 home games. Blackburn had struggled away at a top side in Coventry and have had mixed form away from home this season. So do I still back the home win? It's very easy to get carried away after one result. I'm going to go back to Bristol City this time. Normally, if we go back to the olden days, they would lose one heavily, then they would bounce back. I'm going for Bristol City by 2-1. Let's move on to 2 sides that may have been frustrated to draw at home at the weekend. It is Charlton Athletic versus West Bromwich Albion. Of course, West Brom struggled to break down a pretty poor Sheffield Wednesday side who are obviously struggling both for numbers and in terms of quality. While they didn't give up anything on their own goal as you would expect, they dominated the ball and huffed and puffed, but at no point did it really feel like they were going to break the door down. It never really felt like West Brom were going to score in that game, and I think that's the biggest concern. There's been a few murmurings about Ryan Mason's style, and while generally I think some of those are a little harsh and a bit premature, there's definitely a concern in 3 of the last 5 games they've not scored, and generally at home they have found a way to. In this one, they didn't, and that will be really, really frustrating. How do they get through a team when they come and sit behind the ball? Because West Brom just can't find a way to do that. For Charlton, it is 4 unbeaten now, but back-to-back draws in frustrating fashion. They scored late on against Hull City. Well, against Swansea, it was their turn to go ahead and throw it away. Of course, the perfect start to the second half, but done in later on as the manager loses to his former apprentice, former captain and former assistant manager. It was not the best of games in truth. Neither side created a fair amount. And in a grand scheme of things, if you'd offered Charlton 20 points at this stage of the season, they'd have been very happy. But at home, they have generally been quite strong this year. And it makes this one hard for me because West Brom are normally solid defensively, but away at Watford and Millwall, they showed fragilities that we've not seen before. And Charlton at home, normally pretty good. So I'm going to back them to win this one. Under the lights, I think it'll be a good atmosphere too. So I'm going to go for Charlton Athletic by 2-0 to pile the pressure on Ryan Mason. Let's move on to our 4th game and 2 sides that produced, well, stellar weekends and are in brilliant form at the minute. Should be a game to watch. It is Derby County versus Hull City. Hull have finally put the 2 bits of the jigsaw together this weekend. A clean sheet and a good attacking display. It was a really good away performance. Now, let's forget about the fact that Norwich City are really struggling and have a manager under the cosh. And let's forget the fact that Norwich actually had the best chances in the game and could have won it. On another day, with a more confident side, Hull go and lose that 3-1 away from home. But it wasn't another day. And away from home, you've got to cling on there. You've got to block shots. You've got to put your body on the line. And you've got to be ruthless on the counter-attack. And Hull City were both of those things. They've not lost in their last 6. They're scoring goals. And to keep a clean sheet in any circumstance is important too. So I'm really impressed at the moment with them. I do feel there are games where it's going to go wrong. And they perhaps haven't been as exciting in the last 2 as they have in recent times. But still finding a way to get results and play exciting football at certain times. So for Hull City, really impressive so far. For Derby, a much needed 3rd successive win. A brilliant performance at Sheffield United and a hat-trick for Carlton Morris, who looked like he was back to his best when him and Adebayo were causing chaos in the Premier League with my club Luton Town. He really seems to have found his stride again, and it was a really good away performance again from Derby, who, if you look at the stats, gave up lots of the ball, had less attempts on goal and on target than Sheffield United, but defended their goal well. They worked hard, forced shots from distance for the visitors, gave up corners, but again defended set pieces pretty decently throughout, and then caused a threat when they had the ball. It's a really good away display from both of these sides. So very hard to call what's going to happen this midweek. I would, on the balance of play, probably just back Derby's home form because the last 2, good wins against QPR and Norwich, good draws against Southampton and Charlton before. They're starting to find what we were used to seeing at Pride Park, where they were hard to beat and often popped up with the odd goal too. For Hull, they've been in brilliant form, got a great win at Birmingham, but against them, gave up goals. Against Norwich, gave up good chances. And if Carlton Morris is in this form again, I trust him to take them. So I'm going to go for Derby to edge this game. I'm going to go by 2-1 for the home team. On to another two sides that had a very good weekend, both winning by 3 goals. It is Ipswich Town versus Watford. Let's start with Watford because the visitors this Tuesday night picked up a brilliant 3-0 win at Vicarage Road on Saturday. They beat a Middlesbrough side that had only lost 1 game so far in the season, hadn't conceded many goals at all, and they made them look bang average. It was, again, probably a display more that you would be used to seeing from an away team. They played on the counter. They were a threat going forward. They had to block shots. They had to defend their goal well. Again, a bit like Derby, had to defend a lot of set pieces. It was a very similar display. And Javi Gracia tactically was not afraid to do that at home and take advantage of the best facets of his players. And to use those attributes to expose Middlesbrough's defence was a really good ploy. I was really impressed with how Javi Gracia set them up. Of course, the away form has got to follow. It's a big problem and something we've got to consider for today. For Ipswich, back-to-back wins. Oh, they couldn't be more needed, could they? But after a 1-0 win at home to West Brom, a 4-1 win away at QPR, it was the exact type of Ipswich display we expected. Controlled the ball, controlled possession, but were ruthless with their chances. And it's the reason I picked them to win the league in pre-season, because they had so many players that were capable of popping up with moments of magic and with goals, as well as having stability in the dugout. And finally, we're starting to see that, because we talked in the last episode about the fact that they were relying on the wingers a bit too much. Well, this time, George Hurst got a couple. Nunes came in and got a couple. There was so much more about them, and they're starting to find their stride. So back up to 9th place, just 6 points off the top 2 again now, with that game in hand where they got out of jail against Blackburn. So they'll be feeling pretty good about themselves at the minute. They have generally, if you take away that horror show against Charlton, still been pretty decent at home this year. Watford may try and play in the same way and expose them, and I do back them to score in this game, but away from home, their form is still dismal. And Watford, you just can't back them to win on the road. So I'm going to go for Ipswich by 3-1. I think this will be an entertaining game with lots of chances at both ends. As we move on to two sides that had a very disappointing Saturday afternoon, we mentioned Borough, who lost away at Watford. Well, this time Middlesbrough are going away to Leicester City, who lost 2-0 at home to Blackburn on Saturday. It was a really poor performance from them, and I don't want to keep banging the same drum. I don't just want to say the same thing about Leicester every week, but it's so evident. They created some brilliant chances. They dominated the game for the most part. The defence they've got is always going to be a little susceptible to the break, and it was even under Maresca a couple of years ago, albeit they played in a way that negated that threat somewhat. But going forward, they just don't look like taking chances. They're a team that are crying out for a goal scorer. On another day, they could have won that 2 or 3-1, but somehow only managed one shot on target from what were some brilliant opportunities. You have to ask questions about the recruitment, because with Vardy going, with Iheanacho off last year, with Daka not in form or ever really hitting the heights, who is going to put the ball in the net? And they've not addressed that at all. It's really, really bizarre. And I don't feel it helps any manager, because it's now 3 defeats in a row, 1 win in the last 6. And they're up against a Borough side that, yes, were completely exposed tactically against Watford. But Rob Edwards returned to his former club. It was a blip in the road, wasn't it? They're still in 2nd place. They've only lost 2 games all season. It was something I saw later in his spell at Luton, where they were carved open by teams that played on the counter, and we struggled with it a little bit at times too. But I wonder if they'll bounce back from that, because Leicester, they may well create those chances, but who says they're going to take them? Middlesbrough were 3 unbeaten before. They've generally been pretty solid and pretty defensive on the road this year in their setup. So I'm going to go for them to be a bit more steady in this one. I was very tempted to go for 0-0. I'm going to go for Borough to nick it, because they've often come out on the right side of close games this year. I'm going for Middlesbrough by 1-0. As we move on to the performers of the week against the late show of the weekend, it is Oxford United versus Stoke City. Home side Oxford, back-to-back home games, and got a 96th minute equaliser against a flying Millwall team. A really decent result. I know we talk about how important Oxford's home form is in getting those victories, but I really think that they're going to be happy with a point there. Millwall had the best chances. They controlled bits of the game, but Oxford, they did push towards the end and got the goal that you would argue their endeavours deserved. And that makes it, 7 points from their last 4 games now. And having played against sides in Derby and Sheffield Wednesday expected to be near the bottom with them, they can nick points off teams expected to push for the playoffs. It's going to help their survival chances massively. And nice for Gary Rowett against his former club too. But the main talking point here is Stoke City. 5-1 victory against Bristol City. I know the visitors had an off day, but what a performance from Stoke. Ruthless on the counter-attack, superb going forward. Mabama gets his hat-trick. They just look brilliant under Mark Robins. But look, they still gave up a few chances and defensively they weren't perfect. But I love the fact that they're so versatile in the way they're setting up tactically. They're not just playing how Mark Robins' Coventry team did. And we're seeing so many different sides of their game. This is a Stoke side that looks so much more promising than before. They're going to be a good watch. And I don't expect them to stay right up there. But they've not finished in the top half since they came back down. They've got to find a way to get some sort of stability. And this year, it looks like they may finally have it. It's going to be a tough game to call because Oxford are normally pretty good at home. And again, we saw against Millwall, they gave a top side a good game. Stoke you would expect to be a similar test with a big counter-attacking threat, great delivery from wide areas. And they're in good form too, with 3 wins from their last 4. Away from home, their games have been lower scoring, tighter. I still think they might edge this one though. I wanted to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline. I'm going to go for Stoke by 2-1. And the final game on Tuesday night, the feature match, sees the last unbeaten record that had just left the Championship as Coventry City host a Sheffield United side that are back struggling in the bottom 3. Back-to-back defeats for the Blades, having conceded 3 in both of them against Preston and Derby sides expected to be mid-table or below pre-season. Against Derby, they were woeful defensively. Carlton Morris getting the hat-trick against them. He always does well against the Blades, but still, really poor defensively. It's the same old issue for Sheffield United. They're not taking their chances and they're creating lots of them. They're playing better generally in the game. And at the back, I know I mentioned it in the last episode as well, the defenders that they signed in the summer and the recruitment that was done when Wilder wasn't at the club has significantly regressed their back 4, their back 5. Their defence is weaker than it was last year. And when you're not taking all of your chances, what Sheffield United relied on last year was nicking those 1-0s, those 2-0s at home when they're not playing that well. And at the back, they've got nothing to hold on to here. They're so porous. They're so open. And I really do feel for Chris Wilder because he's come back to a defence that ain't even half as good as the one that he left. For Coventry City, first defeat of the season at Wrexham, a crazy second half game. Again, sort of torn to the sword by one traditional centre forward in Kiefer Moore. We know Coventry have always got a goal threat, and they did again in this game, took a couple of chances, which normally should be enough to get a result. But we have said the one concern this season, and it was against Watford last week as well, they give up a lot of opportunities still. And if you find a team with a striker in form like Kiefer Moore, they are going to get exposed occasionally on the road. At home note, they've been pretty relentless this season. And for a team that are so good going forward, who are scoring 2 or more in every match, to come up against Sheffield United's defence will be a dream come true. I'm going to go for Sheffield United to get the odd goal, because Coventry haven't kept a clean sheet in the last 3. I'm going to go for the host to win very handsomely by 4-1 on Tuesday night. As we move on to the 4 games on Wednesday, starting with Preston North End and Swansea City, 2 sides that have been relatively solid for the most part defensively. Preston with a fabulous performance away at Southampton, who were absolute tosh, but again, we'll cover that later. Preston set up tactically very solid, gave up possession. We're seeing it so much now, aren't we? Possession's overrated. They played on the counter, they did it well, created some brilliant opportunities on the break, and then defended their goal well. You can't ask for much more. It was a very similar story. We mentioned it with Derby. We mentioned it with a couple of others, Watford as well. Defending corners, defending set pieces, blocking shots, and then on the break looking a threat. It's the blueprint at the moment. They got the late second that their performance, in my opinion, deserved. And they've gone into the playoff places again after a really solid start. Looks like it's going to be a much more comfortable year for them this time. For Swansea, of course, came back from behind to get a draw against Charlton. Sheehan going up against his former manager. Going to be hard because they knew each other so well and they set up as we expected. Swansea have tried to make themselves a solid base this year. And look, I think it's probably the right decision from Alan Sheehan to try and work from the back forwards. And while they've not been brilliant to watch at times just yet, they are still picking up the points and keeping themselves comfortably clear. So far, so good. I think a solid campaign would help if Adam Edark could find more consistent form moving forward. But in this one, I don't think it's going to be particularly exciting. If I had to bank on one team to deliver the goods, it probably would be Preston. They're starting to score goals now, which is a worrying sign. And while Swansea will be far better at the back than Southampton or Sheffield United, I'm going to go for them to lose this game. And maybe again by the same score. I'm going to go 2-0 to Preston. 3 to go as we move on to the side Preston beat at the weekend. Southampton are the visitors to QPR, who were heavily beaten by Ipswich themselves on Saturday. 2 poor defensive performances from these sides. QPR have thrown in a couple of these clangers this season, haven't they? They gave up too many good chances on the break. Look, they were undone by some magic and a very good side, but they didn't manage to control the ball. They weren't quite as aggressive in their press as they normally are. I think because they got beaten a couple of times with it early on and Ipswich got in behind, scored that early goal. I think then from that point on, QPR were a little bit more tentative, and you can't afford to be when you're playing in a style like that. So a really difficult day for them, but they've had someone bounce back already this year. It is 3 defeats in 4 though. Southampton lose by 2-0 at home to Preston. They've conceded 8 in their last 3. We've said it all season, even in some of the games where they've won or where they've kept clean sheets, they always look like conceding. They're so susceptible and vulnerable to the counter-attack. It adds to the fact they're not taking their chances. And while the one thing I did say is they were improving their performances, they were creating opportunities the last few weeks. In that game, they did nothing. They had 60% of the ball and they did nothing with it. They didn't look like scoring. They didn't look like breaking Preston down. They didn't look like creating a brilliant chance. It was a terrible display, and it is hard to call because both teams are pretty wildly out of form, both struggling to score goals. And again, I wouldn't blame you for going for a 0-0 or a 1-0 here, but I'm going to be ambitious. I've kind of been drawn in by the weekend with there being more goals, and I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline for the second and final time today, 1-1. Our penultimate game sees the bottom 2 go head-to-head as Sheffield Wednesday host Norwich City. Brilliant effort again from Sheffield Wednesday. They fought really hard, they got a point, and they're giving their fans something to cheer. You've got to be proud of them if you're a supporter. Yes, West Brom had more of the ball, had more of the chances, but Sheffield Wednesday defended their goal brilliantly. They gave up nothing clear-cut. They dealt with set pieces. It was obviously helped by the fact that Ethan Horvath was back in and they had that stability in the back line again. They didn't create anything on the other end of the pitch, but you wouldn't expect them to because it's a tough game away at a side that are normally hard to break down at the best of times. But a really good effort and a good point. The same can't be said for Norwich City, who it's becoming a bit of a familiar tale, isn't it? They just look like they're really on the last legs under Liam Manning. He's lost all 7 home matches this season. When you consider how good their home form was under like David Wagner and early in the Thorpe reign, it really is a shock. And the fact that in the first half, again, a bit like the last game, they played okay. They created lots of chances. They didn't take any of them. On another day, they could have won that 3 or 4-1, but when you get into this sort of rut, it just doesn't happen. And again, defensively, God, they're so bad. And when they're playing that higher line, when they're playing to control the game, and it's the reason that Wagner didn't when they got into the playoffs, they do not have the defenders to do it. So it's partly down to recruitment as well. And I actually think Sheffield Wednesday could nick this game. They've not yet been able to produce brilliant performances at home, but they're now going to have the fans back in the stadium. They fought back hard against Oxford. If they can avoid conceding an early chance, I'm going to go for them to put the final nail in the coffin. A 1-0 win for Sheffield Wednesday, and I really fear it for Liam Manning here. As we move on to the final game, and one that on paper should be pretty entertaining. 2 sides that had very different weekends. It is Portsmouth versus Wrexham. Pompey lost 4-0 away at Birmingham City in a pretty abject display from them. Very rare they don't have a shot on target in a match. Very rare they give up as many as they did. Really poor defensive display. It's been a problem for them since they came back up. They're terrible away from home generally, but they don't often lose like that. And they're going to have to bounce back on Tuesday night because it's a big game at home to a Wrexham side that got a real morale-boosting result. That Kiefer Moore hat-trick, sensational on Friday, and sort of justified the cup selection that Phil Parkinson made on Tuesday night. Again, Wrexham look like conceding goals in every game. They're not the most solid at the moment. But at home, when they've got the fans behind them at the moment, they're such a threat. And they've got goal scorers at this level. And Kiefer Moore is still one of the best strikers in the Championship on his day. And that certainly was his day on Friday. So we're finishing with one of the hardest to call. Wrexham have had a solid start. They're 4 points above Pompey. But Portsmouth's home form generally since they've returned to the Championship has been brilliant. The last couple are hard to judge because they've played 2 of the top 3. But they also beat Borough, the other one of those before. This is the sort of home game they've got to target. Now, in normal circumstances, I would go for a win. I just don't trust it. There's something telling me it's going to be a draw here. So I'm going to go for a thriller and a 2-2 draw. But I would not be shocked at all if Pompey found their home form again. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick recap of what I've predicted. And yes, I've got carried away after the weekend and added a few too many goals in, I think. I've gone for Coventry to get 4 at home, Ipswich to get 3 at home, and I've gone for a thrilling 2-2 in the final game on Wednesday night. There's also, perhaps rather stupidly, only 2 away wins predicted here as well, with Middlesbrough and Stoke City, second and third place teams, picking up 3 points away from home. Those are just my predictions for this midweek action though. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below and give me your score predictions for match week 14. If you beat or match my overall score, you'll get a shout out when we return on Thursday to look ahead to the weekend's action before the international break. But for now, if you did enjoy this one, please do chuck a thumbs up on the video, subscribe and turn that notification bell on for more. We'll have manager specials as and when they arise. Thank you very much for watching. Your support is massively appreciated. And we'll see you back here on Thursday to look ahead to another big weekend.